Okay, so hello and welcome back. Now in this video we will talk about basically the carryover that you sometimes have to do in subtraction, which is very important because if you don't understand it, you're not going to understand long division. And then if you don't understand long division, you will not understand for example, the square root of numbers. For example, there are ways to calculate the square root of numbers, for example, manually by hand in mathematics, of course. And all of these basically rely on the same thing, the carryover. You need to understand it so that you can work with, well, different things basically. So now there is a story here, and it's basically decorating with garlands, and GOT has essentially these garlands. So she has essentially these call them flowers, the unit ones call them flowers. So we have 10 units ones over here, another 10 units ones, another 10, another 10. So that's essentially 4 groups of 10, and basically 6 unit ones. So that's a 46 basically, right? And the same 46 are over here. And her mom says, can I have 1 10 and 8 ones, right? So she needs essentially 18 flowers in total. 1 10 would be a 10, 8 ones would be an 8. So 10 plus an 8 would be 18. Now the problem here is that 18 flowers you cannot take out of these flowers, because of the fact that I'm using the word flower to mean essentially any one of these unit single flowers. So I need essentially 18 of these flowers. I could, for example, take a group of 10, which would be a 10, and I take these 6s, these ones basically, which would be a 6. So 10 plus a 6 would be 16, right? But I need an 18. I could take, for example, 2 of these, which would be a 20, more than 18. I could take, I don't know, and there is no other way to do that, right? So the only way that we can take an 18 out of these flowers is essentially to cut one of these open, and then I have 10 loose ones over here. The 10 loose ones I could put over here, take 8 out of them, and then do something with the rest of these, so that essentially in total I have basically 18 flowers basically. So that's what I could do. Otherwise, there is no other way to get 18 flowers out of this configuration that I have here, right? So GOT says I have only 6 loose flowers. I think I should open a group of 10 essentially, right? And of course, there is no other way. And so what she does is that she says that now I can give 8 to mommy. So 8 essentially she gets out of one of these, and she gives to her mommy, and basically that's what we started with. So we have essentially 1 2 3 4. That's 4 times 10 is equal to 40, 46. So we started with 46 flowers in this configuration, meaning 4 groups of 10 and 6 essentially groups of 1, right? And we wanted to give essentially 18 away. So we essentially what we did is that essentially you keep essentially you can keep 3 of these. The 4th one you can cut it open, and then basically and then somehow essentially try to give away essentially 18 of the flowers to to the mom, right? That's basically what you can do. So I have essentially these 46 flowers. So there is one group of 10, there is another group of 10, there is another group of 10 over here, there is another group of 10 over here, and there is 6 loose ones over here. That's a 10, that's a 10, that's a 10, that's a 10, and then this number is essentially 46. And I want to give away essentially 14 of these 14 unit ones essentially to my mom, basically, right? So 18, is it 18? Right. I want to give 18 to my mom. So if I give one of these groups of 10 away to my mom, that's just a 10, and then I have 6 loose ones left, so I can give these away as well. That's essentially 16, not 18. So the only way that I can do this is that I'm going to cut one of these open. So then I'm going to cut this open. So then what happens is that I have basically 3 units of 10, 3 groups of 10, and then I had these 6 loose ones over here, and then I cut this open. So when I cut this open, I have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and 3, and that's a group of 10. I can just keep it over here as essentially as an open group, right? Now, what I can do is that essentially from this, you can choose from these ones, or you can choose from these ones. Doesn't make any difference. I choose essentially these flowers from here, and I choose this one from here. So that's a 10 and that's an 8, so that's essentially an 18, and I give it away to my mom, right? And then what happens, what remains is basically this one, and these loose ones, this one and this one, which is essentially 2 groups of 10, which is a 20, and that's essentially 8 loose ones. So essentially what remains is essentially a 28, right? So which means that essentially we had essentially 48, we had 45, we had 46. We had 46 flowers, and we had to take away 18 of them, and what we are left with is essentially 28. And if you do the calculation, the 46 minus an 18 is essentially a 28, right? Now this operation, of course, it's easy to do it this way. There is no problem with that. But of course you need to understand it so that you can reproduce the same thing using essentially standard operation, because you cannot do the same thing over and over again using a model. You have to be able to do the same thing using standard operation. And the standard operation is nothing but the subtraction algorithm. The subtraction algorithm is you have a 46, and you want to take away 18 of that, and so basically what you will do is that these are essentially, this is essentially the ones place value, and this is the tens place value, right? So these are the place values. Let me write this a little bit higher so that we can do a couple of things over here. So this is the ones place value, and this over here is the tens place value, right? So I have this essentially, then this is essentially the number of flowers that I already have. This is the number of flowers that I want to take away from those, right? Now, what this means, since this is the ones place value, that means that I already have 6 groups of 1, right? And I need to take away from that 8 groups of 1. So of course there is no way to take from 6 groups of 1, there is no way to take away 8 groups of 1. So then what I'm going to do is that I'm going to cut one of those groups of 10, I'm going to cut it open. Meaning, so a group of 10, I'm going to cut it open, right? So the groups of 10 is right over here, and essentially whatever I already have is just this thing over here. Other than this, I don't have anything really, right? So I have 4 groups of 10, and if I take away one of those, I will be left with essentially 3 groups of 10, right? So then I'm going to say that essentially I'm going to take away essentially one of these 4 groups of 10, which means that then I will be left with 3 groups of 10, right? And then the one group of 10 is basically nothing but essentially 10 groups of 1. 10 groups of 1 basically, which is essentially 10 groups of 1 would be just a 10, right? Meaning 10 times 1 is equal to 10. So now essentially I have taken away one group of 10, which means that now I have essentially this 10 groups of 1 basically, which is just a 10 in buffer. I have to do something with that, and so I will add this 10 to this ones place value. So I will bring it over here, and I'll add it to the ones place value. In the ones place value, what do I have? I have essentially 6 loose ones, and I have 10 loose ones over here. So 10 plus 6 is equal to 16 loose ones, right? Now I have these 16 loose ones over here, and I want to take away 8 from that, which is of course now is not a problem. Meaning 16 minus 8 is just simply an 8. And then basically what happens is that then from 3 groups of 10, I want to take away one group of 10, which means 3 minus 1 is equal to 8, and then the answer is essentially 28. Okay, so that's basically that's essentially how you do the carryover in subtraction. It's of course it's very important. It's a very useful thing when you understand it, because when you can do this, that means you can easily do long division, you can do the division algorithm, then you can do many other things essentially in mathematics, which are of course very valuable and very helpful. Okay, now again, GOT has basically these flowers, has 54 flowers in total, and she wants to give away 28 of them to her mother. And then we want to calculate essentially how many flowers we are going to be left with. And again, we have the same problem, meaning that essentially you have 4 loose flowers over here, and you want to take away essentially 8 of them. So then you have to essentially to cut open essentially one of these groups of 10 and redistribute things so that essentially you can give away essentially 28 flowers basically, right? So let's do this operation as well. So I have essentially 54 flowers. So this is essentially the number of flowers that I have, and I want to give away 28 of them. I want to give away 28 of them. So so how do I do that? Again, I could use essentially the same model that has been used over here, meaning the model of, well, of course, flowers. You can use essentially the box model as well. There is no problem with that. So 54 would be essentially one group of 10, another group of 10, another group of 10, another group of 10, another group of 10. That's a 50. That's 5. And then I have basically 4 loose ones. Out of this, I want to take essentially a 28. A 28, that's essentially a 54. A 28 would be essentially some number like this. So it is essentially 2 groups of 10 and 8 groups of 1, right? Now, 8 groups of 1 you want to take away from 4 groups of 1, which is of course not possible, right? So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to essentially cut one of these open. One of these, essentially, I'm going to cut it open. So that's essentially one group of 10. So instead of this group of 10, I put essentially 10 of these over here. Right, so that's essentially the group of 10. And then I'm going to get rid of this one, right? Now, I want to take away basically 28. Now it's easy. So I take away essentially 8 from here. That's essentially 6 and 2 and 8. And I want to take away 28. So I will take away essentially this one as well and this one as well. That's 10, 20, and 28. And what I'm left with is essentially this one and this one and these ones and this one and this one. So what I'm left with is a 20, and this is a 4, 2, and that's a 26. Which means that essentially a 54 minus a 28 is supposed to be equal to a 26. Of course, you know that essentially 14, 1, and then that's correct, right? So now the exact same operation, I can basically do it using essentially the standard operation, meaning essentially the subtraction algorithm. I want to do 54 minus 28. So a 54 minus 28. So how do we do this operation? So the operation was 54 minus 28. 54 minus 28. And this is essentially subtraction, and this is the ones place value, and this is the tens place value. So I can essentially draw this line over here. And what we did essentially in the first place, essentially we wanted to take essentially 8 groups of 1 out of 4 groups of 1, which is of course not possible. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to cut one of these open, meaning that I have 5 groups of 10. I will take away one of them and take one of them away. So I will be left with essentially 4 groups of 10. And now I have essentially one group of 10 in the buffer. Now one group of 10 would be the same thing as 10 groups of 1, or essentially a 10, right? And so essentially I have a 10 over here, and I have this 4 over here. 10 plus 4 is equal to 14, right? So now the calculation becomes this. And now essentially what I want to do is that I have essentially these 14 groups of 1. I want to take away essentially 8 of them, which means that I will be left with the 6, because 6 plus 8 is equal to 14. And now I have 4 groups of 10. I want to take away 2 of them, so I'll be left with two groups of 10, which means that essentially means that the 54 minus essentially a 28 is the same thing as 26, right? So that's essentially how you do this type of calculation. Now there is only one thing that I wanted to talk about here very briefly, and that is everything that I discuss essentially in all of these courses that are related to calculus. Of course, it's going to be many courses, meaning that essentially, I don't know, maybe probably 50, 60, 70 courses we have to do, each probably 20-25 hours or so, from different chapters of these books, and then put the whole thing together so that we make a complete system for calculus, even more than that. But that's not important right now. What's important is that essentially everything anything that is not important, I just simply leave it out, okay? Because I don't want to waste anybody's time. But anything that I discuss in these courses, for example, that this business of carryover and all of these things, these are absolutely important, because later on you're going to have to be able to essentially to use all of these things. Don't postpone anything to later. Anything that is discussed right now, you need to be able to understand it, and then once you've understood it, move on to the next thing, right? And if there is something that I've discussed and you don't understand, please do ask questions, so that I know that basically there is a problem. For example, there is probably a problem over here, and then I can discuss the same thing, because essentially this is the only way that you can learn mathematics. Mathematics essentially is, you cannot really skip anything. There is unimportant things in mathematics that need not be discussed, though that's another story. And whenever it comes to those types of things, I just simply leave them out, okay? But if there is something important, I will discuss it, and you need to understand it, and then you can just simply move to the next thing, okay? So I will end this video here, and then we will talk in the next video. Thank you.